Well, let's look at the judgment of God. And if you want to follow along, these are neat little sections. Chapter 1, starting in 3 through 5, is his first pointed indictment. And he goes through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these in a row. And so if you'd like to kind of mark them off, I'll point them out to you one at a time. But what happens is the nations around Israel were piling up disobedience against God. The first one is Syria in 1, 3 to 5. And God says Damascus will be judged for her ghastly deeds. What did they do? Verse 3. They threshed Gilead with instruments of iron. Now, for those with weak stomachs, don't listen too closely. But they had done it this in a barbaric and brutal way. It was normal to conquer people back then, but the way they did it was bad. And here's what they did. They took the captives of Gilead, that's up in the northeast corner of this area, and they laid them on the ground, and they took a threshing machine that had long, sharp teeth on the underside, which was used to separate the grain. And they would, it's kind of like our combines, and they had these long things, and they just pull them on sleds through the fields, and it would crush the grain, it would get it everything like it would take the kernels and rough them up, and then they'd go through, and then they'd throw it up in the air, and all the chaff would blow away, and they'd have the grain. They took that machine, and they shredded the individuals up. They just laid them down and shredded them all up on the ground. Well, King Hazael's repulsive act would result in the total destruction of Damascus. First, his palace, verse 4, would be burned to the ground. Secondly, the bar and the city gates, verse 5, would be destroyed. And thirdly, the inhabitants from the plain of Aven, which is modern-day Baalbek, which is in the Bekaa Valley, would be cut off. And the plush summer palace, verse 5, would be destroyed. And so all those things God said, I'm going to do because you were so cruel. Number one, what is God looking for in the world? He's looking for cruelty. And I wrote right next to Syria, cruelty on my sheet. And I wrote it in my Bible too, that God is watching for cruelty. Now, is there cruelty going on in our world today? You better believe it. I mean, some of the atrocities in some of the Argentine Inquisition going on in the last decade or two. It's been reported that they would take political prisoners, put them in airplanes, fly them to 10,000 feet, open the doors, and just dump them out over the ocean and just let them fall to the ocean to their death. That's just part of some of the stuff going on. That's just one country. It's all over the world. God says, don't worry about that. He says, I'm keeping track of the cruelty. Not one cruel act escapes my notice. And he says, look at verse 3, for 3 transgressions of Damascus and for 4. That is a Hebraism for saying, that's it. You're not going to do any more. That's it. And God says, for 3, for 4, I've kept track and you aren't going to get away. Number 2, the second country denounced is Philistia. That's in verses 6 through 8. The major cities, Gaza was the capital, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gath, the 5th major city of Philistia. Gath isn't mentioned, but the other 4 are. It could be that Judah had already captured it, as it says in 2 Chronicles. But Gaza, or Gaza, as in the Gaza Strip, as in the Palestinian area, Gaza was a center for slave trading. Remember, the Philistines were descendants of the Phoenician people, which were part of Tyre and Sidon. They were mariners. They came in, and a lot of people think that the Palestinians are Philistines, and most Bible scholars don't say that's a new kind of thing that's going around. It doesn't really matter. The only people that purport that are trying to make a case for the Palestinians belonging in the land. They don't like Israel being there, but we won't discuss politics tonight. But these people were mariners, and they were known for their trading, and what they started trading in is in humans. And the city, Gaza, would raid surrounding people weaker in defense and deport the whole country into slavery simply for financial gain. It was acceptable in the ancient world that if there was a war or if you were impoverished, that you could be an indentured servant and you could actually work and get out of it. But that slowly changed into actually the ownership of people without them having anything to do with it. And it became a financial gain, and slavery became a merchandising in souls. And it says in the book of Revelation that slavery is going to return, as well as drug addiction. Did you see what passed in California? The legalization of marijuana. And that's just the first step of the drugging of our nation. And I know it's for medicinal benefits, but alcohol is for medicinal benefits too, and look how rampant that is. And it says, and this is, the book of Revelation says, in the last times, the characteristic of the planet is that people are worshiping demons, they're worshiping idols, they are involved in slavery, and they are totally enmeshed in pharmakeia. That's the Greek word for drugs. That's exactly where our world's headed. The drugs are right on there, the occult is on the bloom, and slavery is right around the corner. And I'm not sure what form it will take, but it's the selling of souls. And so because of this, God says, I take note of cruelty. Verse 6, because they deported an entire population to deliver it up to Edom. Verse 7, I will send fire on the walls of Gaza. Well, third nation is Tyre. That's in 9 and 10. And God says, I see here that they are very dishonest. It says in verse 9, in the middle, they delivered up an entire population to Edom, and they didn't remember the covenant of brotherhood. They weren't loyal to a promise they made. There obviously had been a promise made, and they broke it. Now listen, the transgression of delivering up this people, it's not described who the people are, but the brotherly covenant referred to could have been the one between King Hiram and David, or Hiram and Solomon, or Hiram and Ahab. It was a protective covenant between the participants. And the action of Tyre was totally unprovoked. No king in Israel had attacked the Phoenicians. The result of Tyre's sin would be the total, look what it says, the total destruction. I will send fire, verse 10, on the walls of Tyre, and it will consume her citadels. Listen to this. This prophecy was fulfilled when Alexander the Great destroyed Tyre in 332 BC after a 7-month siege. History records that 6,000 were killed in the siege and 30,000 were sold into slavery, and they utterly destroyed the town. God says, you can't get away from my judgment. The fourth nation is Edom. Edom showed no compassion on Israel and tore her apart, verse 11. Edom kept his wrath forever, verse 11. He continually kept it stirred up. And God says, because of that, you're going to be a desolate wasteland. And that happened in the 5th century BC when the Nabateans, an Arabian tribe, totally wiped out Edom. And that's where Petra is. That was their fortress. And we're going to see that next time. Verse 13, the fifth nation denounced is Ammon. That was the descendant of Lot through his younger daughter in Genesis 19. That was an incestuous union that produced the Ammonites. And the Ammonites ripped open pregnant women during their border raids. That was their mark. And they tried to do that to destroy the population. And they did that because they wanted to increase, verse 13, their land holdings. And their detestable sin would be punished by the burning of their capital. And this prophecy was fulfilled by Tilgath-Pileser, the third of Assyria. He destroyed the Ammonites in 734 BC. Isn't that amazing? God says, hey, you're violent. And that was their problem. They were violent, and the Edomites were vengeful. They never lost their anger. And God says, I'm going to destroy you. Now, chapter 2, there was the disrespectful Moabites, and that's the sixth nation. This was Lot's other incestuous child through his older daughter in Genesis 19. And the Moabites had committed the despicable crime of digging up the bones of Edom's king and burning them to lime. This event was so repulsive, it was so disrespectful, that God says that Moab will be destroyed. And according to history, Moab ceased to be a power, and they are no longer recorded, and their doom was just as God had said. Then Judah, in chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, is also spoken against. The Lord said, for 3 transgressions of Judah, and for 4, in 2:4, I will not revoke its punishment, because they rejected the law of the Lord. These other people are ripping up people and vengeful and everything, but these people were just disobedient. God looks at religious people that know the truth and are disobedient. God looks on them as the same par as people that are murderous. God says there's no limiting of my holiness. I expect obedience. And because of Judah's disobedience, God says that they are going to pay for it, and they did pay for it. He says, I will send fire on Judah, and it will consume the citadels of Jerusalem, and that's exactly what Nebuchadnezzar did in 586 BC, destroyed them. Finally, the Lord speaks in verse 6, the eighth nation to be denounced is the northern kingdom, Israel. And Amos got their attention, and now he delivers to the northern kingdom a stinging denunciation. And the first thing he says is, in verse 6, he says that there is social injustice.